Today we're going to be doing a NFL coach tier list in terms of their hot seat. On the top, we're going to have coaches that are 100% safe. The second one is going to be coaches that are just doing well right now. Then we have the coaches whose seats are getting a little bit warm. Then we have the hot seat coaches, and then we have the coaches whose seats are on fire. Pretty self-explanatory just how likely each coach might get fired or could get fired into next season. Make sure to like, subscribe, go into the description, submit your video ideas. Let's get right into it. First up for Shane Steichen from the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going to be honest. I think he's doing as well as he can right now. Anthony Richardson has been slow and has been dealing with injuries. So considering he had to bring in Joe Flacco and he's doing pretty well so far, I can't blame any of what's happening right now on Shane Steichen. No, I'm actually going to change one of the tiers. Instead of the Colts doing well, I'm actually going to put them in the average tier. I think they're kind of at their expectations right now. So even though Steichen's not bad, I think he's about average with this team right now. Next up, we have D'Amico Ryans. Obviously, his job is probably not going anywhere, but I'm not going to put him in 100% safe. He's doing well right now, at least to the best he can. Or that's what it feels like, at least, because this Texan team hasn't been as elite as we expected, but they're winning games. They're still 4-1. But yeah, them only beating teams like the Colts by 2, teams like the Bears by only 6, then getting blown out by the Vikings, barely beating the Jaguars, who were winless at the time, and then obviously beating the Bills. They're not doing as well as we thought. Yeah, so overall he's doing well, but there's a realistic scenario where this team, instead of being 4-1, is 2-3 right now, and instead of being here, he's probably in the getting warm. But for right now, he's doing well. They're not winning it by a lot, but he's still being able to win games. The Saints are up right now. Obviously, that's Dennis Allen. He's definitely on the hot seat right now. I'm just gonna be honest. Those first two games were great, and in my opinion, I'm not putting that on Dennis Allen. I'm putting that on Clint Kubiak because it was that offense that took the leap. They killed the Panthers. Derek Carr was looking elite. Again, it was the Panthers though. Then they killed the Cowboys. Derek Carr also looked very good. Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave. Then after that, kind of got embarrassed by the Eagles, where it felt like you had that game the whole time, but then you let up one big play at the end that kind of just took it off. Then after that, obviously, you have the Falcons, who, again, that last play where Paulson Adebo had the pass interference on Darnell Mooney is kind of what ended the game. And I'm going to just put it on Dennis Allen because his end of game management is not great. Same thing with a team like the Bills. Their end of game managements are not great. And I can't really put that on any player. Instead, I'm going to have to put that on their head coach. And for that reason, the Saints started off 2-0. Now they're 2-2 right now, and they play the Chiefs tonight, or at least from when I'm making this video, they play the Chiefs tonight. There's a great chance they lose that game. So I think right now, even though I think he hasn't done as bad as what he was doing last year, I think Dennis Allen is definitely on the hot seat. He's kind of been on the hot seat for the last 2 years. Next up, we have Sean McVay. With all the injuries this team has had, I can't really put him anywhere else but average. I think he's going to keep this job for basically until he decides to step out of it. I think that's just the type of head coach he is. I think he's a great head coach. He runs a great offense, and I think this Rams team is going to go through a bit of a rebuild for the next couple of years. Get rid of Stafford, get rid of Cooper Kupp, and really buy into guys like Kyron Williams, like Puka Nacua, and on the defensive side of the ball, guys like Jared Verse. So for that reason, I can't really put any of their 1-4 disabilities or however you want to put it against Sean McVay because this team has dealt with so many injuries. In the first game they played where they were fully healthy, they looked very good against the Lions. So for right now, I'll throw them an average. Really, not much more you could do. Next up, we have Jim Harbaugh in the Los Angeles Chargers. He's been doing well this season. I'm going to be honest. The expectations were not high for this Chargers team. I mean, their offense, get the Chargers games real quick. Their offense losing two main wide receivers in Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, it just felt like they were going to have no motor. And their offense hasn't been amazing this season. But that first game, they got it done against the Raiders. That second game, 26 against the Panthers. Obviously, if you could tell, they beat two pretty bad teams and then lost to two solid teams like the Steelers and the Chiefs. So for what his expectations were, I think it's fair to say that Jim Harbaugh has been doing pretty well this season, and it feels like he's going to have that job for years to come. Antonio Pierce and the Raiders are next. I'm pretty confident to put them in the hot seat right now. It's just not working out, it feels like. He was solid to end last season, but this year, maybe it's Devontae Adams being a bit distant from that team. Maybe it's having absolutely no running game. Maybe it's having no quarterback, but everything just looks dysfunctional for that team. Minshew has not looked like the quarterback he was at least last year for the Colts. Their running backs were Zamir White, Alexander Madison, Amir Abdullah, Dylan Laube. It's just not good. So how much of that am I going to put on Antonio Pierce versus the actual construction of this team? I'm not so sure. But for what he's running right now, I'll put him into the getting warm because I think that Dennis Allen kind of has a better chance to get fired. But I think there's definitely some questions surrounding Antonio Pierce right now. Next up, we have Sean Payton. I feel like there's no other place we could put him but the doing well category right now. I'll put him over Jim Harbaugh. This Broncos team is just managing to win games, and it's surprising to me. Starting off with Week 1, they were able to, I believe, they won that game, right? Week 1. Um, no, they lost to the Seahawks. I forgot. Yes, they lost to the Seahawks, lost to the Steelers. But since then, beat a playoff caliber team in the Buccaneers and kind of smacked them around. Beat the Jets on their home fields, kind of owned them on the defensive side of the ball. And then obviously they really showed their offensive abilities. Bo Nix stepped up and beat the Raiders. And I think a lot of that is going to be due to Sean Payton. We know him to be that quarterback whisperer, however you want to say it. He was really good with Drew Brees. And at least that last game against the Raiders looks like Bo Nix has potential as well. And to be honest, Sean Payton, you're doing pretty well this season. John Harbaugh, the brother of Jim Harbaugh, is next with the Ravens. I'll throw him into average, kind of balances it out because they started off the season terribly, losing games to teams like the Raiders. Obviously, that Chiefs game you can't really put against them, but then they kind of came back a little bit. They got a game against the Cowboys where they looked pretty solid. End of the game a bit iffy, but overall looked pretty solid. But then they absolutely routed the Chiefs where their offense and defense looked good. Then they kind of had a shootout with one of the more unsuspecting worst teams in the league, the Cincinnati Bengals, where their defense looked absolutely terrible. So for right now, for what his expectations were, maybe you could consider his seat getting warm, but I think this team is just starting to heat up. They're still my Super Bowl contending or Super Bowl favorite team, in my opinion. So for that reason, right now, Harbaugh, you're doing average. When we look at this at the end of the year, though, I expect you to be in the top tier. Dan Campbell is next, and he's a perfect guy to throw into that top tier. This team's coming off a bye week, but before that, they kind of just killed teams. Their offense started off a bit slow, I must admit, but they have kind of, not even kind of, but they have paved their way to become that offense we know they were. Starting off against, obviously, the Seahawks, where they just beat them, scored 42 points. Derek Carr, perfect. Not his passer rating, but overall, we can all say that he had a perfect game. The Cardinals game, they're able to win that. Then they had a bit of a questionable mark here with the Buccaneers. But if they beat that Buccaneers team, and this team, instead of being 3-1, is 4-0, we could be talking about Dan Campbell being the coach of the year. Andy Reid and the Chiefs are up next. You know, you could argue doing well slash average because that's what they expected to do. But I'm going to say his job's 100% safe. I mean, obviously, most of these guys are 100% safe. I could say everybody in the top 3 tiers except the Colts, their head coaches are going to be 100% safe because that's just how it is right now. They're going to be solid mid to maybe playoff type teams. But the Chiefs are just managing to win every single game. Hopefully that ends tonight against the Saints, but I kind of doubt it. Next up, we're going to have Gerard Mayo of the New England Patriots, and kind of similar to the Rams, Sean McVay type of deal. They just have no talent on that roster right now. For Sean McVay, it was because they dealt so many injuries, but there's just no talent on this Patriots roster. At least I think for the Raiders, they have more talent, and they've shown they have more talent like overall. But for this Patriots roster, there's no talent. I wish they were going to they started Drake May a couple days ago against the Miami Dolphins, but maybe he comes in next week. I'm not really sure, but it would have been a lot better to start him against the Dolphins than a better team like the Texans. Next up, we have Todd Bowles. I'm pretty confident to throw him into the doing well tier. A lot of people were at this guy's head 2 years ago because they didn't have a great year with Tom Brady when Bruce Arians left. But I think he's doing a great job. And I think it kind of just shows that these coordinators can come into a team after being a least successful head coach. They go from pretty bad head coach to solid coordinator, more specifically defensive coordinator, to a really good head coach. And that's what Todd Bowles has done. That's what I think a guy like Brian Flores can do. And I think overall, he's just been doing a really good job this year for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, there's a couple of games where maybe it's a bit iffy. Obviously, that Broncos game for one, but they win that game against the Falcons, which they almost did. This team's looking at 4-1, and they're probably a top 7 team in the NFL if they didn't lose that game. I think overall, he's been doing a great job. Dan Quinn is up next for the Washington Commanders. He's in the coach of the year talks for sure. I think there's one guy that's kind of going to dominate that, though. Instead of putting him in 100% safe, I'm going to throw him on the top of doing well because we know him to be a defensive coach, and this Commanders defense has just not looked well. And how much are you going to put Jaden Daniels' success on Dan Quinn compared to Cliff Kingsbury? I'm going to be honest. I'm going to say not a lot. Quinn's supposed to be your defensive guy, and right now that defense isn't working that well. But at the end of the day, this team's 4-1, so what can I say? Next up, we got Kevin Stefanski from the Cleveland Browns. Not really sure where I should put him. I don't know if he's getting warm. I think overall that team has definitely been very disappointing this season. how much you're gonna put on that on Kevin Stefanski versus Deshaun Watson. I don't really know. For right now, maybe I'll throw him an average. But honestly, I'm just saying honestly that this team doesn't have terrible talent there. Obviously, you don't have your main running back in Nick Chubb, but the running backs for them right now aren't terrible. Deshaun Watson obviously not playing amazing, but we know he was once a very solid quarterback. And that wide receiver core, while it's not amazing, still has guys like Amari Cooper, like Jerry Judy, competent type of guys that we know can go out and play some solid football. So I'm not saying this is 100% on Kevin Stefanski. I'm definitely saying it could be more on Deshaun Watson. But I think overall, Kevin Stefanski deserves to have a little bit of the blame for the Browns' terribleness so far this year. Kevin O'Connell's next. Be for real, he is the coach of the year so far this year. I mean, the Vikings have just looked so good when everyone expected them to not be good. Main games they had this season, if you just want to look at their record, obviously they're undefeated. But games against the Texans where they kind of just ran them into the ground, against the Packers where that first half was so special. Obviously, the second half was amazing, but that first half looked very good. Then they have beating the 49ers, obviously destroying the Giants. And I think overall, O'Connell's the coach of the year so far. And if you don't believe that, you're just not a football knower. Matt LaFleur is up next. And I think with this team's inconsistencies at the quarterback position, um, obviously Jordan Love being solid his first game, getting injured, and then not being amazing since he came back. I think overall they're kind of average. I mean, we expected this Packers team to be around this mark at the not midseason mark, but 5 games into it. We did not expect them to have any injuries though. So with all things considered, they're kind of doing what we expected, but definitely with a bit more boundaries than what we once know. Jonathan Gannon up next for this Cardinals team. I think it's another team that could kind of just throw into that average. At the end of the day, we expect them to be around this 2-3. They have some really good wins against teams like the 49ers, the Rams, and almost eking one out against the Bills. So I think overall they've been pretty solid this year. I don't know if I'll throw him into the doing well, like above his expectations, but I think right now it's kind of where I expect them to be, and I'm happy for them. Next up, we have first-year head coach of the Tennessee Titans, Brian Callahan. I think it's Callahan. Gonna be honest, what more do you want this guy to do? He has Will Levis at his quarterback, and Will Levis has looked very Will Levis to the highest extent so far this season. I mean, turnovers on turnovers, plays that are getting memes, the end of existence. And I think overall, with what he's given right now, there's not too much you could expect him to do. And for that reason, he's kind of at his expectations. They're an average right now. Next up, we have Dave Canales for the Carolina Panthers. This one's definitely interesting. I don't think he's in the bottom two for sure. And he's a first year head coach. So I think same thing with Brian Callahan. What do you want this guy to do? He had the worst team in the NFL. He had to take on the worst team in the NFL. And he got to win a football game. That's pretty impressive in its own right. He had to make that tough decision, which apparently wasn't due to him, was actually to the guys upstairs into benching Bryce Young. But Jones came in. He's looked not as bad as Bryce Young. And the team is playing just bad, but not as bad as they were with Bryce Young. So for that reason, I guess we could put him in average. Next up, we have Brian Dayball. This one's interesting, and I think I might end up putting him into the getting warm tier. And here's why. The first year of the Giants, it looked amazing. I mean, Daniel Jones looked very good. They were a playoff team. They made it to that divisional round. Obviously, they ended up losing to the Eagles, but overall, fans were high for that team, and it looked like they were going to be solid for the next couple of years. Daniel Jones might turn into this franchise quarterback, and they certainly paid him like he was. But after that, terrible. I mean, absolutely terrible season the next year. You could blame it on Daniel Jones' injury, but the mac to the fatter, no. The, the fact of the matter, excuse me, was that Daniel Jones was playing horrendous before that injury happened, before he left the season for the whole year. He was just playing bad, so it's not like if he was going to stay there, that team was going to make another playoff run. And then this year, they started off definitely a bit slow. They've been playing pretty solid as of recently. Close game against the Cowboys. They ended up beating the Seahawks. But I think overall, the seat's definitely getting a little bit warm with Brian Daboll. I think he still has 1 to 2 more years with this team, but it's definitely some question marks right now. And I think if you deny that, you're just not looking at the straight facts. Next up, we're going to have Sean McDermott from the Buffalo Bills. And I know that last drive for the Bills last game was absolutely horrendous. Like, it literally cannot get worse with that clock management. It was terrible. It was Saints level of terrible. It was worse than the Saints, which is, I mean, a lot from a Saints fan. So I'm just saying it was bad. But all things considered, they could be in a lot worse of a position right now. They could have lost that first game to the Arizona Cardinals, but I think he's doing solid. He's definitely doing average what we expected him to do. But there might be some question marks down the line if Sean McDermott can really not lead this team to close out games. Next up, we're going to have Mike McCarthy. I mean, I think this is pretty fair to say. Want to look at this Cowboys? Let's look at this Cowboy. I guess just search up games. The Cowboys games so far this season. They started off bad. Actually, their first game was against the Browns, where they were solid. But overall, they started off bad with the season to the Saints 44-19. Then they lost to the Ravens. At this point, they were 1-2. Luckily, they kind of got their bounce back in beating teams like the Giants and the Steelers, even though they almost lost both of those games. But I think it's very fair to say that his seat is definitely a bit warm right now. If he loses both of those games to the Steelers and the Giants, which very much almost happened, I think he's not a coach right now. But the reason that they won is because he's still a coach. So even though I don't think he's the greatest, I'm not going to throw him onto the on fire or necessarily the hot seat, but I think he's definitely, or his seat is definitely getting warm. Next up is Kyle Shanahan. I know he's not going to get fired, but I think it's fair to put him in the getting warm. This team really hasn't looked good at all this season. And you could put that blame on Christian McCaffrey. They're losing his receiving abilities out of the backfield. Jordan Mason's a great replacement, but he's not the receiver that McCaffrey was. But overall, Brock Purdy did not look good his last game against the Arizona Cardinals. Brandon Ayuk was terrible until his last game against the Cardinals. Deebo Samuel has been quiet. George Kittle has dealt with injuries. Same thing to their offensive line and defense. Overall, I'm just not like what I'm seeing or seeing so far out of Kyle Shanahan. Maybe that's just because of how much obstacles this team has had to jump through, but they cannot close football games, and that's the friendliest way I could put it. Looking at this team's games, last week, obviously, or a couple days ago, they ended up losing to the they lost to the Cardinals. Absolutely blew that one. I have no idea how they lost it. I'm going to be honest. I fell asleep. I was in the car at that time. I fell asleep at halftime. I woke up and they lost the game. Do not know how that happened. They took care of the Patriots. We expected that. Then the game before, basically the same thing what we saw against the Cardinals. They blew the game against the Rams. And I think the end of game management, same thing with the Bills and Sean McDermott, same thing with Dennis Allen and the Saints, is just not up to the level of a solid playoff team. And I definitely hold the Bills and the 49ers to a higher pedestal than I do with the Saints because we know they're overall better teams. But when their coaches cannot close out games, cannot win easy games, where instead of the 49ers being 2-3 right now, they could be 4-1, that's just something you have to look at. And I think with the 49ers completely blowing two of their last three games, you have to put them in the getting warm, especially because this team's also 2-3. Mike Tomlin's next up. I'm going to put him into the doing well. I mean, for the most part, that one game against the Colts is kind of sending my brain into it. Do I move him down? But I think overall, they're playing Steelers football. There's not much more you can expect from them. Next up, we have the Eagles. Nick Sirianni, you are on the hot seat right now. And I think if you ask an Eagles fan, if you ask an NFL fan, they would all say the same thing. Starting off with that first game of the season, you ended up beating the Packers. It was a solid game. Honestly, I thought it was pretty well. Jalen Hurts, first game of the season, didn't look amazing, but overall, it's okay. It was the first game of the season. Second against the Falcons. Again, it's another solid team. I can kind of excuse that one. But against the Saints, I know you guys ended up winning that game, but against the Saints, when Nick Sirianni decides to go for it on fourth down, it felt like what, four times in a row? When they were in field goal range every single time. And it's not like that they were down a lot in this game. They weren't down two touchdowns at any point. It was all like through the whole game, it was 3-0. It was 3-0 until the fourth quarter, matter of fact. And then it was what, 6-3, maybe it was 9-6 at one point. And you kept going for it on fourth down, even though it was a field goal that separated the game. And then the game after that, destroyed by the Buccaneers, looked terrible against the Buccaneers, had a long run to Saquon Barkley, and then the rest of the game decided we're not giving one of the best running backs the ball for the rest of the game. That makes no sense. He's on the hot seat right now, like really, really on the hot seat, where honestly, if they really blow and mess up these next couple of games, he would be on fire, where I expected him to get fired in the next couple of days. Next up, we have Mike McDonald. I think he's doing a great job with the Seahawks so far this year. That one game is kind of throwing me off. Honestly, I might move him down a little bit. That one game against the Giants is just throwing me off so bad. If this team was 4-1 instead of 3-2, boy, I'd love him a lot more. But yeah, the defense did not look good against the Saints. Way too many mental errors. But before that, they kind of kept it close against the Lions, which I like. And then they won solid games against teams that pretty bad, but still end up getting wins against the Broncos, against the Patriots, and against the Dolphins. So for right now, for what he's been handed right now with this team, you have to say he's doing well. We all thought this team was going to be around maybe 3-2, 2-3, and that's kind of where they're at right now. But it feels like they're definitely a top 12 team so far in the league, where many people thought they were going to be somewhere between 16 and 20. They're playing pretty well so far this season. Next up is Doug Peterson. I do not care. I do not care to the least amount that you won that last game. You almost lost to 40-year-old Joe Flacco. I know he's a solid quarterback, but he's 40 years old. Looking at these Jaguars last couple of games, obviously against the Colts, they got their first win. Barely where that defense looked horrendous. Good thing for Press Taylor because if he did not play good offensively that game, it was probably gone for him. But yeah, lost to the Texans. Destroyed by the Buffalo Bills. Lost to the Browns? Like what? Lost to the Dolphins. They had their full healthy team at that point, so I'm not going to blame them too much for that. But yeah, this team again just does not know how to close out football games. Does not know how to play down the stretch. And if we're taking away that last game against the Colts, where their offense looked very good, again the Colts don't have a great defense, but their offense looked very good. Press Taylor and Trevor Lawrence are probably a bottom five quarterback coordinator duo in the league. But they did sell it against the Colts, so I guess we can kind of throw that out the window. What we cannot throw out the window is that Doug Peterson has been terrible so far this season. And if they lose maybe three of their next four games, two of their next three games, maybe even, I think he should be out the door for sure. His seat is on fire. Next up is Robert Saleh of the Jets. And is this crazy for me to say? Maybe I'll say he's hot seat right now. Um, I'll be pretty crazy to see him get fired, but like, hmm, that's interesting for him. Obviously, this Jets team is not doing as good as what we thought they were going to be at around this time. Looking at their wins, just not impressive at all. That first game against the 49ers, it's okay. 49ers obviously are expected to be a solid team. They barely beat the Titans, one of the worst teams in the league. They beat the Patriots pretty well. That was the best game we saw out of Aaron Rodgers. They barely, or they didn't even barely, they lost to the Broncos on their home field, and then they lost to the Vikings as well. The offense just does not look as good as we expected it to. I heard, I'm not saying I heard commentators say, but I think overall the consensus is that Nathaniel Hackett is just not running a modernized NFL offense because Aaron Rodgers is not letting him to. Aaron Rodgers is a traditional in the pocket type of quarterback. And while that's worked out for him in the past, the NFL is changing. We're seeing more motion concepts. We're seeing a lot more stuff that the Jets have not incorporated yet. And I'm going to assume that's more on Nathaniel Hackett and Aaron Rodgers himself than it is on Robert Saleh. But I think overall, when we look at this team right now, it's pretty fair to say that Robert Saleh's on the hot seat right now. Raheem Morris is up next. I'm liking what he's doing with this Falcons team right now. They started off obviously very slow, losing games to the. I still put this right here, but losing games to the Steelers. Obviously, to start off the season. What was that other loss that they had? It was the Steelers and it was the Chiefs. Obviously, two games that the Chiefs game, okay, there was that pass interference at the end where it kind of felt like they could have got that one. But the Steelers, they were just beat. I had a really good win against the Eagles on Monday night. Had a very solid win, even though Darnell Mooney did not get that pass interference. Would that happen? I don't know. But I think overall, Raheem Morris is doing a good job with the team he has right now. And I think he's very lucky because he's one of the newer head coaches that took on a very solid team. Obviously, last year, not as good with Arthur Smith, but they got really solid weapons during the offseason. Obviously, Kirk Cousins looking like an MVP type candidate. I don't know. See, Darnell Mooney has been pretty solid this season as well. So all things considered, he's definitely doing well so far. Next up is Mike McDonald. I'm gonna be honest. If he did not get that extension last offseason, he's probably going down here into the hot seat for me because I just don't think he's a good coach at all. But now he's probably around that average tier because he got that extension. So it kind of just split the difference. His seat is getting a little bit warm right now for Mike McDaniel, excuse me. Yeah, he's just not a good coach. I mean, he's had a very talented offense for basically every single year he's been on this Dolphins team. Not only can he not produce in the playoffs, but anytime this team plays an above average team, it just feels like they get absolutely obliterated every single time. Has he won a game against the Bills yet in his whole entire game and whole entire career? Maybe one. I'm not even sure if he has one though. But yeah, anytime they play in below 50-degree weather, anytime that they play an above 500 team or 500 team at that point, they lose. And I think right now, I would personally put him in the hot seat, but because he got that stupid extension, because God knows why the Dolphins gave that to him, I guess I'll throw him into getting warm. Next up is Zach Taylor. Is he on the hot seat right now? I think he's on the hot seat right now for Zach Taylor. Yeah, this Bengals team, you guys want to throw around that same excuse every year after every year. We start off slow. We'll get momentum as the season goes on. I mean, you could keep saying that, but I mean, you lost to the Patriots week one. Jamar Chase, did Jamar Chase play that game? I think he might have had limited snaps. I don't know if he played that game. He had 6 catches for 62 yards. I think he might have had limited snaps though. That second game though, against the who did they play after that? They went from the Patriots to the Chiefs. Game he caught probably could have ended up winning, but again, just did not get it done. Commanders, you got owned by Jaden Daniels. Panthers, that was a good win. And then the Bengals. So actually, I'm not gonna put him on the hot seat specifically. Maybe I'll say it's getting warm. Yeah, I don't think he's on the same level as Robert Saleh, Nick Sirianni, and Dennis Allen. No, no, no. I don't think he's on the same level as those guys. But I think for sure though, his seat's getting warm because this team cannot win a football game. And then finally, we have Matt Eberflus of the Chicago Bears. If I make this tier list maybe 2 weeks ago, I can make the argument for me to put him on the hot seat slash getting warm. But I kind of like, or I'm not gonna put him on fire, but I'm just gonna look at their roster or their games so far this year. But I've liked what I saw out of this Bears team the last couple of weeks. Um, Kind of felt like they had a disconnection from the locker room, or the coach had a disconnection from his locker room, but since we heard that, they played a really good game against the Rams and they played an elite game against the Bears. So I don't know if something happened during that little integral time, but what I'm saying out of Matt Eberflus right now, I'm not so sure if I want to put him into doing well because just a couple weeks ago I was considering him here. So I'll just say for right now, he's doing an average job, or at least a lot better than what it was before. Honestly, maybe I'll put him here just because that locker room disconnection. I don't know. Maybe I'll just put him there. For you guys comment, I'm actually going to change one thing. I'm actually going to move LaFleur up into the doing well. I mean, him being able, or if that Packers team being able to just win games with Malik Willis as their quarterback still is something I could definitely applaud LaFleur on. So, a lot of you probably not watching this because it's at the end of the video. But if you're going to comment something stupid in the comments like, how are the Packers, how is Matt LaFleur only an average? Don't worry, I'm fixing it. He's in doing well now. So that's going to be it for the tier list. It's going, actually, I'm going to pause this, make sure the tiers look a little bit more better to look at. Green all the way down to red. I think that should be a bit more visually appealing. The on fire is going to be in purple. And whatever. Is purple is fire purple sometimes? Maybe, maybe not. Hot seat though, red and orange, all the way up to green. You understand. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to like, subscribe, go into the description and submit your video ideas. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.